Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching.
Traditionally, world history has been told from the theme, the underlying kind of assumed theme of power or dominance. And so it's very much the story of politics and military affairs. What we're trying to do, what world historians are trying to do, is make sure that the whole tapestry of world history really comes through. So it's not just about power and dominance, it's about environmental issues, it's about issues relating to community. How do we build community, for example? How do peoples interact with the environment? And those kinds of themes are equally important when we try to tell the story of world history.
What is world history? A chronological procession of events and people? A comparison of cultures across time? Whose story is it? Is it the narrative of a Mayan farmer or a court historian in China? And how is world history different from other ways of studying history? How can a topic of such enormous diversity be studied as a single subject? After all, the scope of world history encompasses the entire planet and bridges at least 15,000 years. World history is a way of seeing the world. A worldview. It's a big picture view that captures the ever-changing kaleidoscope of stories. Stories of disparate peoples with multiple perspectives and multiple narratives. Because there are so many divergent viewpoints, and because varied paths and widely different experiences brought societies to where they are today, world history has no single narrative. To focus on any one story would be to miss the picture of the whole. World history is not, as some might argue, simply an accumulation of regional stories. World historians approach their discipline as more than just an exhaustive survey of all societies across all times. Instead, world historians step back to view the panorama in its entirety, not merely separate elements, but as an integrated whole. World historians look for global patterns that emerge from the world's vast collection of narratives. In studying patterns, historians employ a thematic approach, looking for significant connections across both time and geographical space.
Two broad themes can be applied to view the people and events of world history. Integration, how the processes of world history have drawn peoples of the world together, and difference, how the patterns of world history also reveal the diversity of the human experience. What do world historians mean by integration and difference?
I think one of the most interesting examples could be in the Indian Ocean Basin. It's really useful to start to understand ideas of integration when you think about all the different players that were involved in that trade. You had South Asians, Malays, Chinese, as well as Arabs and East Africans all involved in this. For example, in the city of Malacca, you have Chinese merchants coming down who are trading with other Chinese who are living in Malacca, integrating with the local culture, and at the same time maintaining differences by having different communities of just Chinese where they would hang out together.
Like all historians, world historians frame their studies by using maps, units of analysis, and chronology and periodization. Maps enable historians to organize their studies in terms of space. Chronology and periodization provide historians with the means to organize their studies according to time, years, centuries, eras. And units of analysis, such as civilizations or nations, are used to focus and set the parameters for study. The examination of maps, chronology and periodization, and units of analysis illustrates not only how these primary tools are used by world historians, but also how the use of different kinds of these primary tools can produce very different historical perspectives. A map conveys the worldview of the society that created it. It's a reflection of both the time and place the map was drawn. Historians use maps in two ways: as tools to guide their research, and as historical artifacts that show how society saw themselves in relation to the rest of the world. Maps often project the knowledge people had of the world and the quite natural desire to see themselves at the center. A map of Korea from 1402 clearly illustrates this tendency. The newly established Joseon dynasty had the map made as a form of visible propaganda.
It really shows how a worldview of a civilization or society can be portrayed visually. And so you have a map that shows Korea, but at the center of the map you have China and India dominating the landmass, clearly the greatest historical influences on Korea at the time. To the far east you have the Korean peninsula, much larger than it actually is, and then to the south of there you've got Japan, much smaller than they actually were. In the far left of the map to the west you have a greatly reduced Africa and Arabian Peninsula, not at all an important element of Korea's worldview at the time.
Another worldview is found in this copper-plate engraving by the Italian cartographer Gastaldi. What could be interpreted as an upside-down Africa follows the 16th century Italian tradition of not positioning north at the top of the map. Even today, worldviews are shaped by contemporary values. Many people now believe that the best current maps are those created by satellites and other technological tools. Today's maps, like those of an earlier age, are the products of a desire to explore the world and represent it. So historians use maps as historical artifacts to help them understand a particular society's worldview at a given point in time. They also use the most accurate maps available as tools to frame their own studies of the past. Because of its spherical nature, a globe can depict both the shape and relative size of the Earth's features more accurately than a two-dimensional map. But globes aren't always practical, so throughout history, people have used maps as a convenient alternative. But creating an accurate map can be problematic. Maps can depict either shape or relative size accurately, but not both. This dilemma has challenged cartographers for hundreds of years. By the 15th century, European mariners needed a map that would make it easier to calculate distance. Curved longitudinal lines on the maps of the day made it hard for seafaring explorers and traders to measure distance and orient themselves on the vast ocean. Their need was met in 1569 when Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator projected the world in a new way. For the first time, the world was presented with the lines of longitude being parallel, albeit artificially parallel. The parallel lines allowed navigators to use a compass to plot a course by drawing a straight line between the point of departure and the destination. However, these same parallel lines grossly distorted the size of land masses, and the farther from the equator, the more pronounced the problem. On a globe, lines of longitude meet at the poles. So, a map that projects parallel lines of longitude compensates by projecting northern and southern land masses as being much larger than they really are, while keeping the shapes relatively accurate. For example, the shape and relative size of Africa and Greenland are accurate on a globe. Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland. But on a Mercator map, Greenland has been distorted as the longitude lines have been pulled into parallel, causing it to appear about the mass of Africa. Despite these distortions, the Mercator map is still sometimes used, and widely misused, in atlases, textbooks, and newsrooms, nearly 450 years after its introduction.
Initially, the map was used as a navigational chart, and for those purposes, it still today is the best projection to be used. However, over time, because it was the projection most commonly given, it began to portray more and more the idea of European dominance throughout the world, where the third of the map is the southern hemisphere, obviously enlarging the dominant role of the northern hemisphere of Europe and the United States.
In 1974, German cartographer Arno Peters developed a new map, one that tried to compensate for the flaws in projecting area on the Mercator map.
Mercator had, however, sacrificed one cartographical quality in his map which rendered it unsuitable as a totally realistic geographical world concept: fidelity of area. Its particular advantageous use as a navigational aid matched the needs of the Age of Discovery, which became an age of European world control and of worldwide colonial exploitation.
Peters' map more accurately depicted relative size, but distorted shape. And Peters' map, too, has its critics. Some cartographers question the accuracy of the size formulations, and others question his originality. While neither the Peters map nor the Mercator map accurately portray the world, they do, however, communicate distinct worldviews which influenced the understanding of the world.
World historians use maps just like they do historical documents. They look at them and ask certain questions of those documents. So when we look at particular map projections, we're wanting to ask of those projections, what are the historical attitudes that are prevalent at the time of this projection? What are the ramifications of the map projection as it is? And so as we look at the different maps and try to decide which map to use, it really depends a lot on the particular purposes. Are we trying to uncover the attitudes of a time period, or are we trying to see what the worldview is today and what kinds of map projection would be best used to really understand the world as it is today?
Maps are just one of the means historians use to study the past. Scholars also employ units of analysis as organizing tools to identify global patterns and to understand the implications of these patterns. The unit of analysis a historian chooses dictates what questions are asked, what stories are told, and eventually what patterns emerge. Units of analysis help world historians organize history and to understand local, regional, and national histories in a global context. They are framing tools, setting parameters that enable world historians to focus their studies of the past in a meaningful way. Units of analysis include nation-states, such as Canada or Ghana, civilizations, such as ancient Egypt or China, regions, such as Latin America or the Middle East, sea and ocean basins, such as the Mediterranean Sea or Indian Ocean, and systems. Systems might include such diverse topics as communications networks, plantation labor, and the global economy. It has been customary to think of history as the history of nations, French history, Japanese history, and so on. That's because historians have tended to use the nation-state as their primary unit of analysis. In fact, it is no accident that the emergence of history as a professional discipline took place at the same time as the rise of the European nation-state in the 19th century. The two processes were related. New nations needed to create national identities, and historians helped meet this need by writing national histories. Scholars note that the concept of the nation-state assumes similarities in language, ethnicity, culture, and political traditions. But national boundaries do not necessarily coincide with common languages, peoples, and cultures. No matter how national boundaries were drawn, the nation-state is only one container of history, only one of many units of analysis historians use. Today, scholars use a variety of units of analysis to broaden and deepen their study of the past and to shed light on different aspects of historical inquiry. Consider sea and ocean basins. The people who live in the areas around the rim of these bodies of water often have as close a relationship to each other as those across land.
Think about different kinds of rim lands. Two different kinds of rim lands in particular. One rim land might be the 13 colonies that eventually became the United States. If you focus your analysis on that rimland, then the analysis naturally draws you toward the history of the United States and its development. But another kind of rimland might be all of the rimlands facing the Atlantic Ocean. And if you decided to take that as a unit of analysis, then you would naturally focus not so much on the internal development of internal societies, but rather on the processes of migration and exchange and the various kinds of links and flows that linked all of those rimlands together.
French historian Fernand Braudel broke new ground in the mid-20th century when he used the Mediterranean as a focus for his study of European history in the 16th century.
I contemplated the Mediterranean tête-à-tête for years on end, and my vision of history took its definitive form without my being entirely aware of it, partly as a direct intellectual response to a spectacle, the Mediterranean, which no traditional historical account seemed to be capable of encompassing.
By focusing on sea and ocean basins, you could bring out more clearly the processes of interaction that link people living in the various regions around a sea and ocean basin. So, for example, processes of migration, of the exchange of biological species, and cross-cultural trade would suddenly pop into much clearer focus than they would if you did not recognize sea and ocean basins as a unit of analysis.
Since water makes up the majority of the Earth's surface and has provided the thoroughfare for global interactions through time, sea and ocean basins make for a viable and compelling unit of analysis. Another vital tool in the study of world history is chronology. That is, time as perceived and used by people in different societies, and time as used by scholars to organize the past. Societies are as diverse in the ways they measure and think about time as they are in their belief systems and histories. The Judeo-Christian tradition, for example, emphasizes linear time, a concept of time that progresses from a beginning towards an end. Other traditions, such as the Chinese, present a more cyclical view of time. In this tradition, the rise and fall of dynasties provides the chronological basis of dividing their history into distinct, identifiable periods. Some societies reject strict chronology as a guide and see the past in an entirely different light as it relates to the present. In many American Indian cultures, for example, an experience is significant not because of when it happens, but because of what it means. The 19th century Yanktonai Lakota Sioux used what they called winter counts as a system for measuring the past, rather than strict chronology. One participant described the process in this way.
With the council of the old men of his tribe, he decided upon some event or circumstance which should distinguish each year as it passed, and marked what was considered to be its appropriate symbol or device upon buffalo robe kept for the purpose.
Most societies, however, integrate both linear and cyclical perceptions of time into their ways of life. Two of Brazil's major holidays, Independence Day and Carnival, provide good examples. Independence Day, September 7th, marks a specific historic event along a linear timeline. It's a historical rite of passage, recreating Brazil's break from the colonial world and emergence as an independent nation. On the other hand, Carnival falls within a cyclical frame of reference. Its earliest roots were in the spiritual beliefs of spring renewal and tied to the cycle of the seasons. In recent centuries, it has become linked to the liturgical calendar of the Catholic Church, and like Easter, is dictated by the timing of the first full moon after the equinox. While chronology measures time, historians have developed their own method of organizing time: periodization.
History is about the understanding of change and continuity through time. So periodization is simply the business of identifying and recognizing patterns of change and continuity through time.
By using periodization, historians arrange historical information that spans long stretches of time into some sort of meaningful order such as feudal Japan or colonial America. Through his study of the Mediterranean, Fernand Braudel also influenced how historians view and use time. Braudel contemplated ways of understanding historical time while confined in a Nazi prison camp during the 1940s.
Far removed from our persons and daily misery, history was being made, shifting slowly as the ancient life of the Mediterranean, whose majestic immobility had often moved me. So it was that I consciously set forth in search of an historical language in order to present unchanging or very slowly changing conditions which stubbornly assert themselves over and over again.
Braudel suggested that history be dissected into three planes: geological time, the almost imperceptible repetition of nature's cycles; social time, the slow rhythms of economic systems, societies, and states; and eventful time, that is, the history of events. So, within the context of any of these temporal planes, what are the criteria historians use to establish a method of periodization that will be meaningful the world over?
For purposes of periodization, it would not be terribly helpful to take the experiences of any single people, any single land, any single society, and then project them or impose them on all the rest of the world. But to the extent that peoples of different societies have interacted with one another, have dealt directly with one another, or have participated in the same larger historical processes, it might very well be possible to take their interaction or to take large-scale historical processes as a foundation for periodization on a global scale.
But periodization, like maps and units of analysis, also shapes perceptions and expresses particular visions of the past. For example, by grouping events from 1400 to 1800 into a period called the Age of Exploration, historians emphasize the importance of exploration during these centuries. They thereby imply that exploration was not as significant in earlier times. Clearly, this periodization privileges the European Age of Exploration at the expense of earlier eras of discovery, in Europe and elsewhere. But the early Pacific voyages of the Polynesians, the movement of Malay sailors around the Indian Ocean, the transatlantic voyages of the Vikings, the maritime expeditions of Zheng He, all predate the traditional span of the Age of Exploration. What's more, the explorations of space and oceans in the 20th century and beyond extend the Age of Exploration centuries forward into contemporary time. Clearly, the concept of world history involves far more than studying people and events of the past. In fact, world historians need to embrace a broad spectrum of other disciplines to do their work. And they may also need to consider new frames of reference in both time and space for imagining world history.
We know from the experience of contemporary globalization that there are numerous historical processes that you simply cannot understand very well from the point of view of any single state or community. If you want to get an analytical grip on these historical processes, then you need to take not a national perspective, but a global perspective on them.
But how do world historians use other disciplines to expand the boundaries of historical narrative?
Scholars used to take it for granted that history began with writing. Writing, however, was invented only about 5,500 years ago. From that time to the present represents only about 2% of modern Homo sapiens' earthly experience. Before writing, didn't anything happen that we can call history? We know that plenty happened because historians in recent decades have reconceived historical inquiry to embrace many types of evidence besides written words. These include the fruits of archaeology, as well as analysis of languages, climatic change, epidemiological change, and most recently, DNA. Broadening the range of evidence has freed us to investigate historical change over the several million years since our earliest hominid ancestors appeared. Beginning in the early 1990s, several scholars, David Christian is the best known, have argued that the history of our species is inseparable from the Earth's changing environment. The earliest hominids entered into a stream of biological, climatic, geological, and cosmological development already in progress. To understand human history, we must also understand something about the environmental context and its history. That context is ultimately not just the Earth, but the entire universe. And the historical starting point is not writing, but the Big Bang. This way of thinking about the past has acquired its own informal name, Big History. Because Big History's mission requires strong connections between the historical discipline and the physical and biological sciences, it's not for everyone. Thinking about the past on a very large scale, however, steers us toward big but significant historical questions. What makes human beings different from other animals? Why did humans populate the entire world and not just part of it? Why did humans suddenly take up farming after so long without it? What makes our modern age different from all past ages of our species? World history education must address many questions about change in the past 5,500 years. But the biggest of the big questions are important too.
World history is a way of examining humanity's shared past. By seeking global patterns, historians consider the ways the people of the world differ and the ways they become integrated. Like all history, world history is framed by the constructs with which historians choose to study it, constructs of time and place. These tools, maps, units of analysis, chronology, and periodization, each has the capacity to bring a different perspective to the task of identifying and analyzing global patterns. Regardless of which tools are used for a given study, they enable the world historian to view the grand panorama of the human past in its global context.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching. For information about this and other Annenberg CPB programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.